You stopped trying a long time ago, Renata.
I was about to be his boss.
He waited until the waiter cleared our plates to do it. 26 years of marriage, and he chose the dessert course. I need something that makes me feel alive again, Paul said, not even lowering his voice. You stopped trying a long time ago, Renata. That's when Brooke walked up behind him, 29 years old, his direct report. Her hand landed on his shoulder like she'd done it 100 times before, because she had. Everyone at that table, our friends, people I'd hosted Thanksgiving for, went very quiet and very still, the way people do when they'd rather watch a car crash than admit they saw it coming. I want you to remember that dinner, not because it was the worst night of my life. It wasn't, not even close, because 3 weeks before that dinner, a law firm I'd almost blocked as spam had already left me 2 voicemails about a woman I barely remembered, my mother's estranged sister, and a decision that was about to make everything Paul said at that table look very, very small. I hadn't opened the letter yet. I just hadn't played my hand. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 26 years is long enough to stop noticing the small ways you've disappeared from your own life. I married Paul Voss when I was 28. He was ambitious, funny in the dry way that made rooms lean toward him, and he made me feel like the most interesting person he'd ever met. For a long time I was. Somewhere in the last decade, that shifted. Not all at once. There was no single betrayal I could point to, no evidence I could have caught. Just a slow erosion. He started staying late, for the Halbrook account. He stopped asking how my day was, and started telling me how his had gone, expecting nothing back. I told myself this was just what 25 years looked like. I told myself a lot of things. Brooke joined his department at Sterling Regional Logistics 2 years ago. I met her exactly once, at a company holiday party, and I remember thinking she laughed at everything he said a beat too quickly. I filed it away the way you file away a lot of small warnings you'd rather not open. Our 25th anniversary, actually our 26th, but we'd missed the 25th during a bad year and promised to make it up, fell on a Thursday in early spring. Paul planned dinner at Corbin's, the restaurant where he'd proposed. I remember thinking that was sweet. I remember being wrong. 12 of our closest friends were there when he stood up between the entree and dessert and told me, in front of all of them, that he needed something that made him feel alive again, that I'd stopped trying, that this, gesturing vaguely at 26 years, wasn't a life he could keep living. Brooke was already standing by the bar. She'd been there the whole time. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that, because I think women my age are expected to either collapse or explode, and I did neither. I sat very still, the way you do when your body understands something before your mind catches up. Then I took off my ring, set it next to my water glass, and asked the waiter for the check. What none of them knew, what I didn't fully understand myself yet, was that 3 weeks earlier, a law office downtown had already tried to reach me twice about a woman I hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. My Aunt Diane was my mother's older sister, and the family story about her was always short and a little bitter. She left for California at 22, cut contact after a falling out nobody ever explained to me, and became, as far as anyone knew, a cautionary tale about ambition. She'd actually become something else entirely. The letter had been sitting under a stack of mail for 19 days by the time I opened it. Heavy cream paper, my full legal name across the front in a font that looked like it cost money. I'd nearly thrown it out twice, assuming it was some kind of scam. The office belonged to a firm called Ashworth & Klein, 3 floors of
Welcome.
glass and
Please do
quiet
come
in
in
the
and take a
financial
seat.
district.
Thank you so
A
much.
silver-haired
What a
attorney
view.
named Gerald
It is an
Ashworth stood when I
impressive
walked
space.
in, which felt strange,
get down to
like my
business.
presence was worth something to someone, for the first time in a while. Your aunt passed 6 weeks ago, he told me. She built an investment portfolio over 4 decades. Early tech, industrial holdings, and a controlling position in several logistics and distribution firms. You are her sole beneficiary. I laughed. Actually laughed. The way you do when a sentence is too large to process as real. Then he slid a folder across the desk, and I stopped laughing. Among the holdings, he said, tapping one line near the bottom, is a majority equity stake in Halbrook Industries. I knew that name. Every employee at Sterling Regional Logistics knew that name. It was the parent company, the one at the top of the letterhead nobody in the building ever thought much about, the one that now, as of that morning, belonged to me. Paul had left a woman he called boring for a 29-year-old. He had no idea he'd also just walked away from the one person who now controlled his entire company. I didn't do anything with that information for 90 days. Not because I was frightened, because I'd spent 26 years being underestimated, and I finally understood that patience, used correctly, is not weakness. It's leverage. Gerald connected me with a small team, a forensic accountant, an HR compliance specialist, an employment attorney, and I asked them to start exactly where I already suspected something was wrong. Paul's division. What they found wasn't just an affair with a direct report, though that alone violated 3 separate company policies. It was a pattern. Inflated vendor contracts routed through a company owned by Brooks' brother. Safety inspection reports quietly altered. 2 prior harassment complaints against Paul, settled and buried before I'd ever met Brooks' name. A junior analyst, who'd been pushed out 18 months earlier for refusing to sign off on falsified numbers. I met some of these people myself, in coffee shops and parking lots, women mostly, who told me things they'd never felt safe putting in writing. It stopped feeling like it was about my marriage somewhere in those conversations. It became about what happens when a man like Paul is never once looked at closely by anyone with real power. The board meeting was scheduled as a routine quarterly review. Gerald made sure the language stayed boring on purpose. Paul had no reason to prepare for anything. I walked into that boardroom in a gray suit I still wasn't fully used to wearing. 12 board members, executives along the wall. Paul, scrolling his phone near the far end of the table, glanced up with the automatic dismissiveness he gave everyone, and then his face changed. Gerald spoke first. "I'd like to introduce Renata Voss, majority-controlling shareholder of Halbrook Industries, and effective today, chair of this board." The silence was not polite. She doesn't even work here," Paul said, standing. "I don't," I said. "Please sit down." I didn't raise my voice once. I walked the room through 11 months of falsified safety reports, the vendor contracts tied to his girlfriend's brother, the 2 buried complaints, the analyst pushed out for telling the truth. Page by page, name by name, dollar by dollar, until there was nothing left in that room that could be explained away as a misunderstanding. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated for cause," I told him. "No severance. Referred for further review." He stood so fast his chair hit the wall behind him. "This is revenge." "No," I said. "This is what happens when the right person finally reads the paperwork." Brooke found out before I ever called her. Because men like Paul always call someone the moment the story turns. She left 3 voicemails. I answered the 4th. "You could have warned us," she said. I thought about that word, us, and how quickly it had replaced any version of me in his life, and how easily it was already replacing itself again in hers. "I didn't owe either of you a warning," I said. "I owed the employees who'd been afraid to speak up an honest audit. That's all this ever was." Within 2 months, without Paul's salary, the apartment he and Brooke had rented became unsustainable. His name started appearing in local business coverage next to words like misconduct and falsified records. Old colleagues stopped returning his calls once they understood he had nothing left to offer them. I didn't gloat. I want to be honest about that too. There was no satisfaction in watching someone's life come apart, even someone who'd built his second act on humiliating me at a dinner table. What I felt instead was quieter than triumph. It was closure. I still think about that anniversary dinner sometimes. Not with anger anymore. I think about the version of me who sat very still and set her ring next to a water glass, who had no idea that 3 weeks earlier, a woman she barely remembered had already made sure she'd never have to sit small in a room again. Paul thought he was leaving someone who'd stopped trying. What he actually did was let go of the one person who was about to own everything he'd built his whole identity on standing next to. He found out too late to matter. This is the end for today's story, guys. This is a story about being underestimated. Subscribe for more real-life stories of quiet justice, second chances, and women who were never as small as everyone assumed.